Glen Hansard, a voice that never stopped singing there, are voices that just belong to a city. Dublin has always been loud with music, buskers on Grafton Street, guitars echoing off the shop fronts, songs drifting out of pubs at closing time. But for almost 40 years, one voice rose above all of it, rough around the edges, honest to a fault, impossible to ignore. That voice belonged to Glen Hansard. On the 29th of July, 2026, that voice went quiet. Glen Hansard died at the age of 56, following a motorcycle crash near strawberry beds in Chapelizod, on the western edge of Dublin. The news broke early that morning, and within hours, a country that rarely agrees on anything found itself united in grief. This is his story, not the polished Wikipedia version, the real one. The one that starts on a street corner, not a stage. Before the Oscar, before Broadway. Before his songs were sung in cinemas around the world, Glen Hansard was just a kid with a guitar case open on a Dublin pavement, hoping someone would drop in a few coins. He didn't come from money, and he didn't come from connections. He came from the street, and he never really left it, not in spirit. Even decades later, long after he'd have every reason to feel he'd made it, Hansard kept coming back to busk. Every Christmas Eve, without fail, he'd set up on Grafton Street, not for himself, but to raise money for Dublin's homeless. Over the years, he pulled in some extraordinary company for those cold December nights: Bono, Imelda May, Shane MacGowan, musicians who could have filled arenas, standing on a street corner in the cold because Glen asked them to. That tells you something about the man. Success never moved him away from where he started. If anything, it just gave him a bigger platform to keep giving back from. The Frames, A&D, The Commitments. Hansard's first real taste of the spotlight came in 1991, in a film that's become part of Irish folklore, The Commitments. He played Outspan Foster, one of the band members in that scrappy, soul-obsessed group trying to bring Dublin its own version of Motown. It was funny, it was loud, and it made him a familiar face long before most people knew his music. But music was always where his heart was. Around that same period, he founded The Frames, a rock band that would become the backbone of his career for the next 3 decades. They weren't an overnight sensation. They built their following slowly, gig by gig, album by album, becoming one of the defining acts of the wave of Irish bands that came up through the 1990s. For a generation of young musicians in Ireland, the Frames weren't just a band to listen to, they were proof that you could build something real without leaving home to do it. Once, and the Oscar that changed everything. Then came 2007, and a tiny film shot on a shoestring budget of just $150,000. It was called Once. Directed by John Carney, it told the story of 2 struggling musicians in Dublin, a busker and a Czech immigrant, who meet by chance and form a fragile, unspoken connection through the songs they write together. Hansard played the busker. Starring opposite him was a young Czech musician named Markéta Irglová. Nobody expected what happened next. The film won the World Cinema Audience Award at Sundance. It went on to make over $23 million at the box office, more than 150 times its budget. And at the 80th Academy Awards in 2008, Hansard and Irglová won the Oscar for Best Original Song for a track they wrote together called Falling Slowly. If you've never seen the acceptance speech, it's worth finding. Hansard, visibly stunned, thanked the audience with the kind of disbelief that only comes from someone who genuinely never expected to be standing there. It wasn't rehearsed, it wasn't polished, It was just real, the same quality that ran through everything he ever made. The story didn't end at the Oscars either. Once was later adapted for Broadway, again with songs by Hansard and Irglová, and it swept the Tony Awards in 2012, winning 8, including Best Musical. A film that started as two people busking on a street corner ended up on one of the biggest stages in the world. The swell season A&A solo career out of Once came another chapter, the swell season, the musical partnership Hansard formed with Irglová, built on the same songs and the same chemistry that had captivated audiences in the film. Together, they toured the world, carrying that same unpolished honesty from the Dublin streets to concert halls everywhere. Eventually, Hansard stepped out fully on his own. He released his debut solo album, Rhythm and Repose, in 2012 and continued making music for over a decade after that, including Didn't He Ramble, which earned him a Grammy nomination for Best Folk Album in 2016. Whatever the format, band, duet, or solo, the through line never changed. Hansard wrote like a man who meant every word. More than a musician. What made Hansard different wasn't just talent. Plenty of people have talent. It was how he used it. In 2002, he became the very first presenter of RT's Other Voices, a live music series that's since become one of Ireland's most treasured platforms for new artists. He didn't just occupy the stage, he helped build one for others. And then there was that Christmas Eve busk. Year after year, decade after decade, in the cold outside the shops on Grafton Street, raising money for people sleeping rough in his own city. It became such a fixture of Irish Christmas tradition that even global stars would show up quietly to take part. Perhaps the most striking moment came in 2023 at the funeral of Shane MacGowan, the legendary Pogues frontman. Hansard stood up and performed a rousing rendition of Fairy Tale of New York alongside Irish singer Lisa O'Neill, turning what should have been a moment of pure grief into something that had the entire congregation dancing in the aisles. That was Hansard's gift. He knew how to hold both joy and sorrow in the same breath. The news that shook Ireland. On the morning of the 29th of July, Irish police confirmed that a man in his 50s had died in a single-vehicle motorcycle crash in Lucan, on Dublin's western outskirts, shortly before 4:30 a.m. He was treated at the scene but pronounced dead a short time later. Hours later, his management team, @C Management, confirmed what many had feared. In their statement, they said Hansard's family was deeply shocked and heartbroken and asked for privacy at what they called an extremely difficult time. He leaves behind his wife, Maire Saaritsa, and their young son, Christy. The tributes came almost immediately and from every direction. Ireland's President, Catherine Connolly, called him one of the country's great singer-songwriters and praised his role in bringing people together through live music. The Taoiseach, Michel Martin, said he was deeply saddened by the loss of a man who made a significant contribution to Ireland's cultural life. Even Bruce Springsteen posted his own tribute, saying he was heartbroken at the loss of a great musician and, in his words, a generous and gracious man. A book of condolence opened at the Mansion House in Dublin for members of the public to pay their respects. Markéta's words, but perhaps the most personal tribute, came from the woman who shared that stage with him back in 2007, Markéta Irglová. In her statement, carried by RT News, she remembered Hansard not just for his musical legacy, but for the mark he left on her as a person. She spoke about how he taught her, and so many others, to live more deeply, to look for the good in people, and, in her words, to lead with heart, to step forward even while afraid, and sing what is true. It's a fitting way to remember him, because if there's one thing that ran through every part of Glen Hansard's life, the busking, the bands, the Oscar, the Christmas Eve concerts in the cold, it's exactly that. He led with heart. Every single time. Glen Hansard started with nothing but a guitar case on a Dublin street, hoping for spare change. He ended up with an Oscar, a Tony, a Grammy nomination, and, more importantly, a city and a country that genuinely loved him back. He never stopped busking. He never stopped giving. And he never stopped believing that music could do more than entertain, that it could actually change how people saw each other and themselves. Glen Hansard is gone, but every time someone picks up a guitar on a street corner and sings like they mean it, his voice will still be there. Rest well, Glen. Dublin won't forget you. Neither will the rest of us.